Week 12 of the fantasy football season. He is running back, sits every matchup this week. Thursday night, Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cleveland Browns. Najee Harris, I'm going to have him in the starting lineup. I know last week wasn't a great game for him versus the Baltimore Ravens, but Harris, a physical running back. He's getting a big workload. And now Jalen Warren, he's mixed in at times as well for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. But Warren, for the most part this season, he's been banged up and not productive at the running back position. I know last week he did have 10.8 fantasy points was Warren. But in terms of getting touches and putting up points weekly as an option, it's been Najee Harris's backfield. So Harris this week with a good matchup at the Cleveland Browns. He's a start. Jalen Warren is a sit. Like I said, he had the 10.8 fantasy points, 9 carries, 41 yards. He added some catches in that ball game as well. But like I said, week in and week out, I don't think he's a viable option. Now to the Browns, Nick Chubb, he's a flex option. I know Nick Chubb's not 100%. Still trying to get his legs under him after coming off a devastating knee injury last season early in the year. So Chubb, since he's returned, his best game was his first game back in Week 7 versus the Bengals. And ever since then, 5 or less fantasy points he's had in PPR leagues. But this week, I think Nick Chubb, they're going to rely on him. They're going to run the football a little bit more. And, these matchups in division are going to be usually physical games. And Chubb's had a decent track record versus the Steelers. So he's a flex option. Tennessee Titans at the Texans. I know Tony Pollard last week, it was a down game for him, but I still think he's a running back that can help fantasy owners. It was one bad game for Tony Pollard. And this week, I think Pollard and this Titan team, they could have some success moving the football at the Houston Texans. Obviously, I don't think a lot, but Tony Pollard, still a solid running back. Good number 2 option. And only with 13 games on the slate this week, there's going to be some running backs you just have to put in the lineup, and Pollard might be one of them. Joe Mixon to start each and every week. What a season it's been for him in his first year with the Houston Texans, and the change of scenery maybe is what he needed. I know he was good with the Cincinnati Bengals over the last couple seasons, but not putting up the impact numbers like he is now. So this week in a pretty good matchup versus division rival, the Titans, he's a start. Minnesota Vikings at the Bears. Aaron Jones, he's a start. Last week, I know it was a down game. I know Cam Akers vultured a receiving touchdown in the red zone, and also Sam Darnold had a quarterback sneak for a touchdown. But Aaron Jones, let's say he got one of those opportunities, it would have been obviously a better game and a productive game for him. So this week at the Bears, a division rival, a team he's obviously very familiar with going back all those years with the Green Bay Packers. He's going to be a start. Cam Akers a sit, but Cam Akers definitely has gotten a decent workload over the last few weeks and a good change of pace back. And maybe this Minnesota Viking team, they're saving Aaron Jones a little bit for the latter part of the season. But anyway, Cam Akers, he's definitely someone that should be owned in 12-team leagues or deeper, but not someone this week I would put in the lineup. DeAndre Swift to start. Last week, a big 40-plus yard run for DeAndre Swift to salvage his fantasy day, where he didn't do much early in the ball game. But Swift, for the most part this season, he's been a top 15 running back for points per game. So he's got that breakaway speed. He can catch the football out of the backfield. And this week, in a grinded-out division ball game versus the Vikings, I think he could go out there in a home game for the spare team, have a decent outing. Roschon Johnson, we know he's the goal line back. We know he's getting some touches mixed in. Herbert got traded a few weeks ago to the Bengals, but he's still not having enough fantasy value to be in starting lineups. He's definitely someone as well to be owned in 12-team leagues or deeper, but not someone in your lineup is Roschon Johnson. But obviously, if Swift ever went down with injury, he's going to step right in and be the starting back. Dallas Cowboys at the Commanders. Rico Dotto, he's a sit for me in this game. Rico Dotto, his numbers haven't been great all season. I know he's the full-time running back now for this Dallas Cowboy team, but this game script could be similar to what we saw with the Cowboys and Texans last week, where they're down early and often, and the running game really can't do much, and the Cowboys are one-dimensional, and we saw Dotto drop some passes. So this week, Rico Dotto, I don't really see him doing much in this ball game. He's a sit. Brian Robinson, a start for me in this one. Brian Robinson, one of the better goal line backs in the league, and all-round backs, I believe. He could catch the football out of the backfield if you need him to at times. Within the 5-yard line, he's scoring that touchdown with his physicality and the nose for the end zone. And this week in a matchup versus the Cowboys, where they can't stop anyone, we've seen it over the last few weeks. Running backs have had big games, and especially Joe Mixon. In last week's game, he's a start. Austin Eckler, he's a flex option for me in this game. Eckler, the last few weeks, he's obviously carved out a bigger role. He filled in for Brian Robinson in Week 9 and Week 10. And then Week 11, even as the backup running back, he was getting a lot of snaps, and they were playing a lot of 2 running back sets was his Commander team, where he had 17.60 fantasy points, a lot of catches and receiving yards. So this week in a matchup versus a bad defense, I think Austin Eckler could be a decent flex option, even though he's not going to get tons of touches. Next game, New England Patriots, at the Miami Dolphins. Ramondre Stevenson, he's a start. He's been a solid back for the majority of the season, and there's no competition. Antonio Gibson, he's not getting touches. The passing game hasn't been all that great. Obviously, the options are only Demario Douglas, Hunter Henry, the two viable options, and Stevenson could do a little bit of everything in the backfield. So this week, versus a pretty mediocre to bad defense in the Dolphins, I got Stevenson as a start this week. Devon Achane, he's a start each and every week for this Dolphin team. One of the best running backs in all fantasy football and pro football. We've really seen Raheem Mostert, especially the last few weeks since he returned to the lineup, really eat into the workload. So Achane, once again, with a great matchup this week, a must start. Kansas City Chiefs at the Carolina Panthers. Isaiah Pacheco finally returning to the lineup after he's been out majority of the season with his leg injury. So I would put him in the starting lineup. Last week he practiced. Obviously he didn't play at the Buffalo Bills, but now he's going to return, and this is a great matchup to get him back in to the thick of things for this Chiefs team. So Pacheco will be a start. Kareem Hunt, the flex option. I believe this could be a 50-50, 60-40 split between these two running backs in this ball game. And if this game gets out of hand, then I think Pacheco will get to the bench in the second half of the ball game. But right now, I think Pacheco, he'll get some good work in this ball game. Kareem Hunt will be mixed in at times, and he's a flex option. Chuba Hubbard, even in a tough matchup, I would give him a nod. One of the better running backs in all fantasy football is Chuba Hubbard, and they obviously rewarded him with a nice contract a few weeks ago, extension on a 4-year deal with his Panther team. So I would give him a start. Jonathan Brooks, he's finally going to make his season debut, but with a tough matchup and with Chuba Hubbard playing great football, I don't believe he's going to be an option. He's a sit. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New York Giants. Rashad White, Bucky Irvin, both starts for me. Both these running backs have been a nice tandem and one of the best 1-2 backfields in the league behind Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, in my opinion. So Rashad White, one of the better receiving backs in the league. This is a good matchup. This Giant defense can't stop anyone. And Bucky Irvin, in his rookie season, he's been impressive in between the tackles, and he's got good breakaway speed. So I like both backs as starts. Tyrone Tracy a start. He's been a solid running back in his rookie year as well for this New York Giant team. And this Giant team now with Nick Vito in their quarterback, I think they're going to look to run the football a little bit more in this game. And Tyrone Tracy could catch the football out of the backfield. It's a Singletary. He's been a non-factor the last few weeks here. And this week, Tracy, a nice start. Detroit Lions at the Indianapolis Colts. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, they're locked in weekly as starts. We know Montgomery, short yardage, goal line, in between the tackles, guys. And Jahmyr Gibbs, he comes in a lot in the second half where defense is worn out, and he puts on the Jets, and he's a good receiver out of the backfield. So like I said earlier, best 1-2 combo backfield in the league. Good matchup at the Indianapolis Colts. They're more starts. Jonathan Taylor started last week, a tough game, no doubt about it, at the New York Jets, where they have a decent run defense for the most part. But this week, I think Taylor, even in a game where they're possibly going to be trailing right out of the get-go, 10-14, nothing, is this Indianapolis Colts team still could go out there and put on a good performance. Denver Broncos at the Vegas Raiders. Javonte Williams, a flex option. A couple weeks ago, looked like Estime was the running back tone over here for this Denver Bronco team. But Javonte Williams last week in the blowout victory versus the Falcons, he went out there. He had a good ball game. He found the end zone. He caught some passes out of the backfield as well. And this week, we'll see how the workload goes between these backs. But it's still, I'm going to be cautious with Javonte Williams. Even in a good matchup with the Raiders is a flex option. Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, we just don't know what work and touches they're going to get weekly, so they're sit options. Estime took a back seat in the ball game versus the Falcons, where Javonte Williams was the hot hand, and they went with him in that ball game. So pretty much it looks like Peyton's going with the hot hand approach, and obviously that's hard to predict who's going to be the running back, and McLaughlin's more of a change of pace. Third down back at times, he's a sit. Now to the Raiders, Madison, Zamir White, Amir Abdullah. There's just no value in this backfield for this Vegas Raider team. And Madison, he left the game. He was banged up at the Miami Dolphins. We don't know if he's going to play. And Zamir White left the game as well when he was banged up. So next man up was Amir Abdullah. Even though he's not an in-between-the-tackle type of running back, he's a third down back. And he did find the end zone in that game at the Dolphins. But this Bronco defense, one of the best D's in the league in this backfield, I just can't trust. Arizona Cardinals at the Seahawks. James Conner, he's a start each and every week. It's been a good season for James Conner, no doubt about it. Physical running back in between the tackles, catch the football out of the backfield. And obviously he knows this system very well with this Arizona Cardinal team. So I think he goes out there once again versus the middle of the pack to poor defense of the Seahawks in Seattle and has a decent ball game. Kenneth Walker, he's a start each and every week. Last week I know wasn't a great game at the Niners, but did find the end zone and helped lead the comeback at San Francisco. So Kenneth Walker, he's a 3-down back. Zach Charbonnet hasn't been a threat to his job ever since Walker returned from injury early in the season. They had that 3-touchdown game at Detroit. And this week versus middle of the pack to a bad defense, he's a start. San Francisco 49ers at the Packers. Christian McCaffrey, he's looked pretty good over the last few weeks since he returned to the lineup. So CMC, he was the number 1 pick overall in most fantasy drafts. He's played good football the last couple weeks. And this week in a good matchup at the Packers where we saw DeAndre Swift have a big game versus them. I think CMC goes out there once again. Big game must start. Josh Jacobs to start. Volume alone. Position Green Bay's putting him in. He's been successful for fantasy owners for the majority of the season in his first year with the Packers. So this week on paper, I know it's a tough matchup versus the 49ers. But like I mentioned earlier, Kenneth Walker went out there at a decent ball game. And I think Josh Jacobs weekly, you expect 12, 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Sunday night, Philadelphia Eagles at the Rams. Saquon Barkley, he's a lock each and every week. Top 3, top 4 option. Worst case, he's going to be. And this is a good matchup with the Rams where their defense can't stop anyone for the most part. So I expect a high-scoring game between these two teams. And Saquon Barkley, we know, at that home run ability. We saw it last week where he was bottled up majority of the game. And then in the second half, he took off and put up a monster performance. So this week at the Rams, fast track Sunday night, I expect a big game once again. Kyren Williams, last couple weeks, numbers have definitely gone down with Cooper Kupp. Puka Nacua back in the lineup the last 3-4 weeks for this Ram team. And Kyren Williams, he's still getting good yards per carry, but he's not finding the end zone. And he hasn't been much of a factor out of the backfield catching the football. But this week versus Philadelphia, I think he could surprise people even versus a good defense and have one of his better games in the last month. And the final game of the week, the Hardball Bowl, Baltimore Ravens at the Los Angeles Chargers. Derrick Henry, he's locked in weekly as a top 3 option at the running back position, leading the league in touchdowns in the backfield. And he just fits this offense like a glove, and it was a great landing spot. So this week at the Chargers, where I know their defense has been stout for the majority of the season, even though we saw Chase Brown have a nice ball game last week, I think Henry once again goes out there, has a big performance. J.K. Dobbins, he's a start last week. Big game for Dobbins, found the end zone twice, including a game-winning touchdown with 20 seconds left in that ball game versus the Cincinnati Bengals. So Dobbins in this matchup versus former team, you know, the juices are going to be flowing, and I believe he's going to go out there and have a good game. Gus Edwards a sit versus his former team. Edwards, he started the game for the Chargers, believe it or not, but he only finished with 6 carries, 27 yards in the Week 11 victory versus Cincinnati Bengals. Edwards, his former team as well, like I said, but I just don't think the touches are going to be there. And maybe if he plops in the end zone, he'll have a decent game, but besides that, he's obviously not a receiver out of the backfield, and the touches aren't going to be there. Sets running back start sits every matchup for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.